Okay. Oh my gosh, Angela, I say this all the time, but oh my gosh, this is going to be such a truly helpful, honest conversation that we get to have with a very dear friend today. And you guys, I wish that you could see her precious darling face, but I am so thrilled that we get to have our dear friend, our professional dear friend, Mallory Lamm. I had the privilege of knowing her here at Union University, and it just seems like you graduated so long ago. But I just asked you, and you said it was 4 years ago, and it's just like,
hmm
good night alive. Time has flown, and you are doing incredible work. So, tell our listeners who you are professionally and what it is you're doing. And sister, we are going to just dive right on into this great conversation.
I love it. Hi, I'm Mallory Lamm. I live in Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And I own my own private practice. And so I see clients every day. I specialize in eating disorders, anxiety, and depression. And so I'm excited to get into all the stuff that we have planned today. It's going to be good.
Yes, listen, I said before we recorded that this is a conversation that I feel like whether as adult women in our own lives or as moms of teenage young adult daughters, this is a conversation that could last for hours and hours and days and days.
hmm
We're not going to do that, but I just think it's important, Mallory, and maybe, I don't know, maybe now more than ever, that the world, these girls, ourselves included, that are growing up in, the pressure is real. The pressure is
hmm
on, and just this idea that we have to look a certain way, be a certain way, act a certain way, perform a certain way. It is really all tied to a lot of it, our physical appearance. And so,
hmm
yes, we need to talk about that. And yes, I do want to hear from you about this increase. I listened to something last week that it was old, maybe 2018, a study where anxiety and depression in girls, high school girls, has just
hmm
increased so much. And that was 2018, probably coming from 2016, 17 study. I can imagine what it is now, but I don't want this to be a depressing episode. We want to shed some light on important, healthy conversations that girls can be learning from and parents can be learning from, because we don't have to sit here. We don't have to live here forever. Where there's hope for us. And there's wonderful,
hmm
precious people like you that are helping girls find health and wholeness into who they are and who the Lord has created them to be. So, oh my gosh, Angela, are you ready?
Let's go.
Here we go. On your mark, get set, go.
So Mallory, let's just start right there. Body image, self-esteem, the daily battle that as females we're facing when it comes to appearance and worth and value. Just start right there. Talk to us
hmm
about those things.
Yes. So there's a research study. I don't know the exact year, but it's like 95% of women struggle with body image.
Uh,
And oftentimes I define body image as the beliefs we have about our body. And yet it is the least talked about thing, I think, among women, but also in the church, because we don't know what to do with it.
hmm.
And so it's been super neat for me to kind of heal my own body image, but then also be able to use it clinically and to help others heal from their body image. And I think in the Christian circles, we do a really awful job of talking about it or not talking about it, or even like we think that it's like, oh, this is actually really healthy in the name of Christianity, but it's actually really not, right? Like of wanting to manipulate our bodies and going on yo-yo diets and exercising to the extreme, whatever. And we put on like this, oh, well, this is because God wants me to do this. And it's like, really, God actually wants us to believe that our bodies are good as they are, and they actually
Hmm.
don't have to be manipulated. And this idea that I'm really coming around right now is we will always feel disconnected from the divine when we are believing the opposite about our bodies and what God believes about our bodies, right? So if
Oh, that's
I'm
good.
believing, yeah, if I'm believing that my body isn't good and my self-talk towards my body is that I need to lose weight and I am just awful and I don't like the way these jeans fit, whatever. And God's over here like, girlfriend, you are totally fine. I made you in my image. Like, you have a good body. And I don't believe that I will feel disconnected from him. And I think ultimately what's happening is when we are trying to change and manipulate our bodies in a really unhealthy way, then that is showing our mistrust in God, right? Like when we mistrust our bodies, then we mistrust our hearts, and then we mistrust God, and we mistrust his creation. And like, we truly don't understand the gospel when we are coming from that place of mistrust. And so having this idea of body image is actually a really big spiritual issue, and we got to start talking about it.
Boy, I can tell you one thing, at 51 years of age, nobody has ever talked about it in that way.
So what do we ask ourselves? What's the checkpoint? How do we know if this is an issue for us? And then what do we do if it is?
Yeah, it's a good question. I always think about what are the thoughts that I have about my body? What are the beliefs I have about your body? If you really want a good exercise, I want you to write a letter to your body. And I bet it would be really hard for somebody to not write anything hateful in that letter, because probably the first thing is we're thinking about all these things that we need to change about our body instead of this language of love and compassion that the Lord would have for us. And so I think when we are able to take captive those thoughts that we have about our body, then we can do the work of healing ourselves. And so asking yourself the question, who told me that? Because we all have a moment where we remember that somebody said something about our bodies, or maybe it was just even from culture that it was like, I have to be a certain shape or size or have a certain outfit and haircut and all the things. We remember those moments. It probably goes way back to childhood. So if we're able to identify those moments, then we get to move forward and doing that work with like telling other people, like telling your friends in your community. That's why community is so important, or doing your own therapeutic work. I think those are the first steps to healing.
Let me ask you this. You know how we do this with little girls, and I'm sitting here thinking, I don't know if I did this having boys, but I don't know, is this helpful, or do we need to think about how we compliment our little girls and what we say to them? I think we say things just out of default and not realizing that we're constantly praising a girl all the way through college. Of, oh my gosh, you look so cute. That looks great on you. You look so thin. Have you gained weight? Have you lost weight? Like, from when they are teeny tiny little girls, we're always, well, maybe not always, but we are often placing their worth on how they look. I mean, am I wrong in that? And is that a bad thing? Or do we need to make sure we're doing this plus this?
Oh, that's a great point. I think oftentimes we aren't meaning to be hurtful by it, right? When we're like, oh, you look so good, you look so cute. And I think it's more of the comments when it's talking about like, oh, you've lost all this weight. How did you do it? Right. Because then I think that's just implying, oh, I value you when you're in a smaller body.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Instead of being like, oh, I value you at whatever body size you're at, because you're more than a body. And so I wonder if the compliments could be like, you look so strong. You look so happy. What's making you happy right now?
Yeah.
Or of like, oh, that outfit is so cute, instead of it's flattering, right?
Yeah.
Because it might be flattering. That's great. That might be true. But also, is that then implying that they need to wear a certain, type outfit or haircut or whatever? And so I do think compliments can play a really big part. And so our language is so important of how we speak to one another.
Well, let me ask you this. For somebody that specializes in eating disorders, what do you see a trend? Is there a common thread at a certain age? What is it that you just consistently see as a moment where this is where that guy or that girl, but here we're specifically talking about girls, that they began this eating disorder? Where is that point?
Yeah, it's actually getting younger and younger, which is pretty sad. Right now, I think the sickest people that I see are adolescents. So anywhere from about 10 to 13 is when it gets really awful. And that can come out from a lot of reasons. I think social media is playing a huge part. One of the things I do with my clients is like, we're checking your social media. Who are you following? Are you following all these people that all look one certain way? Because then our brains are going to take that information of like, oh, well, then I must look that way, instead of having this body diversity of people of all different shape, sizes, and colors on my Instagram feed or on my Facebook feed, whatever it may be, whatever you're looking at constantly, or even what you're reading and listening to. So I think it starts from a really young age. Oftentimes it can start in the home, and it can be from comments that you just don't even realize that mom and dad might be making, of saying like, oh, these are good and bad foods. Well, actually, food is just food, right? Like food can offer nutrients and pleasure and satisfaction and fuel. There actually really aren't bad or good foods, because when we create something that's good or bad, that then is creating shame. And we don't realize that we're doing that when we're saying, oh, this is good for me, this is not, instead of, oh, that's what I prefer. That tastes really yummy and makes me feel good.
Listen, God
that
help
language
us. God help us.
I've never been taught that, but I know that I need that in my life. Because what do we do when we're stressed? Well, I'm going to Freddy's.
Yeah,
I need ice cream.
Sure.
And then we feel guilty about it. You know what? Have the darn ice cream.
Yes.
But I don't like the way a sugar crash makes me feel. And I am trying to focus more on that. That's so good. Okay, Mallory, you posted something on Facebook a while back that I loved, because Fran and I love to go for walks. Fran is the walking outdoors queen.
She is.
And she's such a good influence on me. And she has just proven over and over to me what value is there.
However, I think there's a big however coming.
However, well, no, this is good to talk about though. You posted about how exercise isn't therapy and why we need both. And that caught my attention because Fran and I love Christian counseling. I love my counselor. I love the things I've learned. Fran and I benefit from each other's counselors. we love counseling. So I want you first to talk about why exercise isn't therapy and why we need both. And then I want to talk a little bit more about counseling and what that is.
Sure. Yes, moving your body can be so helpful, that it can be a really great coping skill. And also it's not therapy, because I think of like, okay, exercising is a good coping skill that can very easily become a really bad coping skill really quickly. And so from this perspective of, I think that on average, it's like, yeah, if you are moving your body like 10 to 30 minutes a day, maybe even like 5 days a week, cool, great, love that. But if it's like, you're spending hours at the gym, probably don't have a great relationship with exercise and with your body. And oftentimes people are like, oh, exercise is my therapy. It's not your therapy, because I've been through years of training, and therapy is like learning your behavioral patterns, working through your trauma. It is processing through the emotional parts of things that just exercise just can't give you. I mean, I think exercise can offer, a release of serotonin where it makes you feel better. It's so true. Moving your body can feel better. And also when we ignore our body's signals to be able to rest, then that's another way that we're mistrusting God, because God gave us those body signals to know when our body is like, enough is enough. I need to go lay down on the couch and watch TV. And that's totally great and good. But we're ultimately mistrusting God when we ignore the signals our body's giving us. And so that relates to exercise as well.
Well, I mean, good grief. My favorite thing in all the world is to go for a good long walk, and it clears my mind and opens up my brain, and I'm able to think better and do all these wonderful things. But the reality is 2 hours later or the next day or whenever, all those things that I have not dealt with, well, guess what? They're still there.
Yes.
So exercise is not therapy. It is just a way for me to take care of myself. And that's it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Mallory, tell us, do you have to be in crisis to go to therapy? Who needs therapy? Why do we need therapy? What do we get out of therapy?
Everyone needs therapy.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen.
I'm obviously such a huge advocate for it. I don't think that there's any one person who wouldn't benefit from therapy. Oftentimes I'm like, don't wait until you're in crisis, because oftentimes therapy is doing that preventative work from being in a crisis. And so whether it's just managing stress, whether it's managing anxiety, depression, or even of just having somebody who is non-judgmental, who is just outside of the situation, who does not know any of your friends or your family, and just being like, hey, just hear me out. Like, help me talk through this. Give me some feedback. What are you seeing? What am I missing? I think is the gold and the magic of therapy, of having somebody come alongside you and just say, hey, I'm not shaming you. I'm not judging you. I'm just here to come alongside you and support you. And I oftentimes just think of it as this healing journey. And even as a therapist, I'm like, I know I don't have all the answers. My client is the expert on their life. I'm not. I just get to come alongside them And that is a beautiful gift. And so therapy can help anyone. Everyone should go.
Yes, I agree. I mean, listen, we are the biggest fans in all the world. I read something in, oh gosh, I've already forgotten. I read it yesterday. And I typed it up because I saved it and I wanted y'all to see it. And I thought, this is so profound. I have not heard this. You probably have, Mallory, but it says, if you don't heal what hurt you, you will bleed on people who didn't cut you.
Oh,
How
Yes.
about that?
mm.
I'm going
Yes.
to read that
Oh.
again. I'm going to read it again. If you don't heal what hurt you, you will bleed on people who didn't cut you.
Wow.
Mhm.
And that's exactly why we all need to be in therapy, I believe. Even if it's not just on a regular basis, but you know yourself well enough to know, okay, I've got to dip back in and get some help. And because I know that, therapy is expensive. I think that there are plenty of people that are moving out of that place where therapy has a stigma. I think people are way more open to it now than they've ever been, but still it's scary. It's scary to open up your life and how you feel about your life, past, present, and future. Is just scary. But I think we're moving along as a society, and I'm so thankful for that. And just thankful for people like you. Good grief. I bet you are busy. Are you busy?
I am busy. I think especially after the year that we've been through, I mean, everybody's struggling. I oftentimes ask my clients, one of the very first questions I ask is, what's causing you pain? There hasn't been anyone that I've come across that is just like, no, I'm not experiencing any pain.
Yeah.
We're all in some sort of pain. Going back to your point about when you don't heal what hurt you, that you're gonna bleed out on other people. I think the saying of like, hurt people. Well, healed people heal people.
Yes.
Right.
That's
And
good.
oftentimes when we're hurt in a relationship, we have to heal in a relationship. And so oftentimes that therapeutic relationship can offer you that healing, because it's really hard to heal in a relationship when that other person doesn't have the capacity to be what you all need them to be to heal. Right. And so a therapeutic relationship can help heal that relationship and heal mistrust that you might have with others because of hurts that you've experienced.
And I think one of the things I was afraid of going into therapy was that it would rip every scab wide open and go back and make me really camp out in all the hurt my whole entire life. And that has not been my experience at all.
No. Oh man, it's such a slow process. And that is the beautiful thing about it, is the client's the expert. I just take their lead and never making somebody talk about something they don't want to talk about. And it's such a journey of like, okay, I think of it as a suitcase, like, oh, there's all these different things of clothing, and we're going to pick up a shirt and we're going to look at it. We're going to try it on. We're going to see if it still fits, if it's worth, be staying in our life. And then once we're done, we put it back, and then we pick up something else in the suitcase, and we keep doing that over and over in the therapeutic process.
Well, and that's, I think if people have not ever been through therapy before, it's kind of like, listen, you got to be patient. You've got to be patient in this process, because if you go too fast, too hard, listen, that's well, a good therapist wouldn't allow that to happen. But I think for people that are willing to, maybe after this episode, consider talking with somebody, be patient in the process. Okay, let's switch gears just a little bit. I think what I want us to talk about right now is a word that it can trigger some people, and even one extreme or the other. And that word is trauma. So I think there's people that know trauma and understand trauma. And if they have experienced trauma, it just a little bit kind of like, oh, okay, here we go. And then there's people that will swing way to the other side and be like, okay, hang on a minute. Not everything is traumatic, for crying out loud. Is that a buzzword? Are we just throwing this word around now when we don't even really understand and know what trauma is? So I want you to define for us just the best, maybe non-clinical, just everyday Joe definition of what is trauma.
Trauma is any disrupting event, whether physical or emotional, that surpasses your ability to be able to cope. And so many things fall under the umbrella of trauma. I think about, we think of our standard definition or thought of trauma being like abuse in some sort of sense, which is certainly trauma, and also a friendship falling apart. That can be some sort of trauma. There can be conflict in the family that can hold some trauma if it just feels like I cannot cope with this. It feels so overwhelming. A physical injury, witnessing some sort of trauma, somebody dying, that's grief, could be a sort of trauma as well. So trauma, there's a lot of things that fall under trauma. Oftentimes people are like, I don't have any trauma. And it's like, we all have trauma of some sort. We all have trauma.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And I do believe that, that trauma, if it's not dealt with, we all know, I mean, I know from my own life that it is stored in the body, and it's going to sit there, and it's either going to not be dealt with or come out and surface in all manner of unhealthy ways. And it does affect our nervous system. And I think that it's just a matter of not being afraid with a professional therapist to identify, like you said at the very beginning, what's causing you pain. Now, let me ask you this. If that person can define what's causing them pain, does that, in your mind, does that equal that's trauma? Is that across the board 100% of the time? Not necessarily.
I think you can feel pain and it not be trauma.
Yeah. Okay. So there are going to be people that maybe just honestly can't come up with a traumatic event over the last few years of their life. Now, it's probably in there. If they've lived long enough, like I have, they're going to have it. What happens if we don't deal with this trauma? Because trauma is a strong word. It's not a light, easy word that you just kind of, you say it and you just kind of coast over it and move on. I mean, it's a big word. What happens to us if we do not deal with our trauma?
Well, undealt with pain will always come out sideways. And so oftentimes when I see, some unhealthy behaviors, I'm like, okay, what trauma is that pointing to? Right. And so oftentimes if we don't deal with the trauma, a lot of unhealthy coping skills are going to come out, whether that's excessive drinking, it's pornography, it's just numbing yourself out and constantly just watching so much TV, it's binging food, it's restricting food, is all just pointing back to, hey, I'm not okay. And it's probably coming out of a place of trauma, but also trauma being stored in the body. Oftentimes stress and anxiety and depression are products of trauma being stored in the body. And so if we don't allow that trauma and the stress to exit our bodies, then we will feel stuck. And so oftentimes I talk about the window of tolerance being of like, that is where I feel super stable and emotionally regulated. When you are outside the window of tolerance and you go up, you're stuck on, which is where a lot of people live, of like, for me, I know, overworking or just that constant state of anxiety, perfectionism, that's being stuck on in trauma and outside of your window of tolerance. When you feel like you are just hustling, and you can't give yourself permission to rest and you just always feel supercharged. But then there's also the flip side where you're stuck off, and that is the more depressive state where you are like, I cannot get up out of my bed. I'm just constantly always sad. I'm always down on myself. I just don't know if I can live anymore. That is stuck off. And so that's typically what happens when trauma is not dealt with, is you will either live in the stuck on or the stuck off until you can get back into your window of tolerance.
Okay. So if I know for me that I am going to live in a stuck on, and I know internally, okay, I see what's going on here. I know what's happening. What do I do next?
Yes, I think that is often the therapeutic work of being like, okay, when I am really hustling and I'm striving and I'm overworking, what is actually going on emotionally?
Because let me tell you something, Mallory, I avoid.
Yes.
I'm going to avoid it. I think now that I'm just sitting here thinking about it and listening to you, that hustling, that moving, that going and doing or not doing, it's just an avoidance. I do not want to deal with whatever it is I need to deal with. I'm not going to do it.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. That is a great point. It's oftentimes denial, minimization, avoidance of like, oh, it's not that bad. I don't really want to deal with that. That's a lot. So I'm just going to keep hustling and maybe it'll go away. But it's always there. It's not going to go away. And so I think it's that therapeutic work of inviting yourself into, okay, what's really going on? what am I actually trying to communicate that I'm communicating through my behaviors of hustling or my behaviors of all of these unhealthy coping skills?
Do you have like a checklist of questions we can ask ourselves, or when we feel that coming on, when we know that's where we are, is there anything that we can do to take good care of ourselves in that moment?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I oftentimes think about what is the true narrative of what's actually going on, what is working well, and what is not working at all. And then I think, okay, I need to get some people around me, whether it's community, whether that's a church group, whether it's friends, whether it's your therapist, whoever it might be, of kind of like this check engine light of like, okay, I got to check something out. Something is not working and I need to address it. And so oftentimes my biggest coping skill is this self-care menu that I kind of just created for myself, but now I use it for my clients, because oftentimes when we are outside our window of tolerance, I call it turtle brain. I don't know why I call it that, but it's just a funny name. But it's like, you cannot think straight when you are in just like this, you are just emotionally dysregulated. You can't think straight. And so I have on my phone a menu of self-care activities that I know help me. Not what helps somebody else, but what helps me. And so for me, I need to go get a medicine balm tea from Starbucks is what's on my list, because I don't know why, but that brings me a lot of comfort. I need to get it under my weighted blanket. I need to make sure I'm not isolating myself. I need to go on a walk. Maybe that means I need to not, maybe I need to go like window shopping or something. So I'm just like not by myself, right? And I can just have this space to clear my thoughts. So I write down coping skills that work for me. And then I have on there, who are my safe people? Who are the people that I can invite into this of whatever's going on, and I can trust them with my story. I can trust them with what's going on. And I tell those people. I have people in my life that can repeat that self-care menu back to me, and they will say, okay, Mallory, have you done X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, okay, got it. Or they're like, hey, have you talked to God about it? And I'm like, gotcha, good point. I'm gonna go do that now. I think those things can be so helpful. And even writing yourself a note when you are in a good place, to be able to write yourself a note of what you need to hear when you are in the dumps, of like, hey, this is not going to take you down. You are strong. You are resilient. You can move through this. I have that on my phone because I know I forget all the time. So I need reminders.
That's so good.
Mhm.
Okay. You mentioned in that the importance of people and community and the safe people that know your story and can ask the good questions and to remind you of those things that you mentioned. But at the same time, everybody needs boundaries, right?
Yes.
Everybody
Yes.
needs boundaries. And so we have to know relationship to relationship, person to person, boundaries are going to look different. And how talk to us about, I know that we know what boundaries are, but I don't think it's something that you can just take from person to person and just apply them. Just this is what they are. Help us think through a little bit more strategically about why we need boundaries and the benefit. They are for good. They are for good. So talk to us a little bit about boundaries as we navigate the relationships and when we're in those hard seasons.
Yes. Oftentimes I think boundaries get a bad rep because everybody thinks that it's so bad and it's so awful, but you're so right. Like, boundaries are a way of preserving a relationship. And boundaries are actually this, hey, in order to stay in a relationship with you, this is kind of what I need to happen. These are my expectations. And it's just a really good form of communication. And so oftentimes I say we teach people how to treat us, right? Like, so oftentimes when I'm getting really frustrated with somebody because they keep doing something over and over, but I haven't communicated to them, hey, actually, that's not okay with me. I think we can set boundaries, and it can actually be really kind, right? Of just saying, hey, I don't have the capacity for that right now, but thank you so much for asking. Or, hey, that's not okay with me right now. If you continue talking about this, I'm going to need to leave the conversation. Boundaries always have to be consistent. When we are, set a boundary one day, but then it's like the next day, it's like, no, it's fine. Nobody's going to follow your boundaries because you're being wishy-washy. And so boundaries take consistency. And then also boundaries have to have consequences of like, hey, if you don't follow my boundary, this is what happens. And that's not in a way of being mean, but of like, hey, I'm serious about this work of boundaries, that everybody can't have access to me 24/7, right? Like,
That
I think
is
it all
good.
goes.
Say that again.
Yes. People cannot have access to you 24/7. Because here's the thing I always say, people are always like, okay, well, God says to love others. And I'm like, that doesn't mean no boundaries. Actually, when God says, love yourself and love others and yourself, you have to also love yourself. So part of loving yourself is holding boundaries with people. And it's also loving them too, right? Because then if you are not setting boundaries, you're just creating resentment in your heart. And then that relationship is always going to be on tension if you don't have boundaries and expectations for each other.
Listen, all the people pleasers just died right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's this false belief that we have to be these martyrs. And, I think you posted
Yes.
something about over apologizing and how that's a trauma response. And what is that? And why do we do it?
But let's just say this too, for just a second. I think as females, we do not need to be afraid to establish those boundaries and then to verbalize those boundaries. I
Right.
mean,
Yes.
that is across the board in every literal context I can think of. Relationships of the opposite sex, your friends, your work people, your family, your friends, everybody. We don't need to be afraid to say all those things you already said, Mallory. But we just need to use our voices and be okay with setting the boundaries, not just setting them in our head, but like
Yes.
open up your daggum mouth and
Communicating.
yes, and talk about it. Okay, let's go back to that apologizing thing. That's good.
Well, and just to build real quick on what you said, it's not being mean if I put a boundary and can't let somebody have access to me. And it's taken me 40 something years to learn that. So, okay.
Yes.
Apologizing. Go ahead though. Were you going to say something?
Yes.
Mallory?
Well, to over apologizing is 100% a trauma response. Oftentimes, even if you're a people pleaser, there's probably some sort of trauma in there. Because oftentimes we are apologizing because we think we just carry so much shame and we think that we've done something wrong and we don't like sitting in that shame. So then we apologize as this way of trying to make ourselves feel better. Right. And so that's oftentimes why we over apologize, is like, somebody's upset with me, I have to apologize to them. And it's like, what would that be like to kind of sit in that? Yeah, sometimes people might be upset with you and that's okay. That's actually, not everybody is going to like you all the time. There's going to sometimes be moments when we're just not in agreement with each other, and that's okay. And so oftentimes I think there's the other side of it where it's like pride, right? Where we're like, I don't apologize for anything that I say. And that then is pointing to that we don't understand the gospel if we are not willing to apologize. And so I think it's finding that balance of like, yeah, did I really do something wrong here? And if I did do something wrong, I'm willing to apologize. And then if, I really didn't do something wrong, I actually don't have to apologize because I'm covered by the grace of Jesus.
Oh, that's good. I've got a friend that I noticed this in myself, and then I started seeing it in her. And finally, I'm just like, why are you apologizing? I just started calling her out. We have to hold each other accountable.
Absolutely.
Listen, Jesus help us, right? Jesus help us. Okay, Mallory, again, like I said at the beginning, we could talk for 100 hours about this. So this is a lot of great information. And I do believe it's an episode where people, even myself, like I want to listen to it again and just kind of sit in it for a minute. And I believe, I don't know, I have no idea what I'm basing this on. This is a complete assumption, but I believe that most listeners that will listen to this are going to feel rather quickly, I need to go talk to somebody. And even just to begin to verbally process and sort through. I don't want to overwhelm anybody and say, well, if they're my age, if they're 50, well, let's just go all the way back to when you were 5 and let's unpack your childhood, like that's overwhelming. But how can you encourage people? Let's just okay, slow the thing down. How can you just basically practically encourage people? Go find yourself a therapist because of this. What is this?
Yes. One, I want to say to anyone who's thinking about counseling, how brave of you to think about reaching out to somebody and inviting them into your life and into your story. That's a huge thing. And that is a scary place to be. And that makes so much sense. And you have every right to find a counselor that feels good to you and is a right fit. Not every counselor is going to be a good fit. So even if you've had a bad experience with counseling before, that doesn't mean all counselors are that way. And I really appreciate as a counselor when somebody's like, hey, this was kind of my past experience in counseling. And I'm like, that gives me so much good information. Like, thank you for telling me that. Right. Or of even being able to voice what you need in therapy of like, hey, I know there's probably stuff that happened in my childhood. I'm not quite ready to talk about it yet, but here's what I can talk about is I am going to the bag of chips each night and eating the whole bag. And I can't talk about that. So can we just start there?
Yeah.
And the therapist will respect that 100%. And so I think sometimes it might be, I remember when I first went to, was texting my friends of like, I'm so terrified. And I invited them, even my friends, into the process. And somebody checked in on me afterwards of like, how did the session go? And so if you were thinking about counseling, it is a good thing and it can be scary.
Yeah. Okay. Listen, I don't know how you do your job because you are taking on a lot of people's lives. I mean, honestly, you are taking on a lot of people's lives. So kudos to you. God bless you. We just think the world of you and appreciate the work that you do so much. So as we conclude, as we wrap this thing up, Mallory, Lamm, here's the deal, sister. I hope and pray that you are growing and that you are being poured into in some form or fashion. So tell us, it's important to us that we ask people, mainly just out of, I want our listeners to ask themselves this question. And so tell us how you are growing. How are you staying healthy? How are you growing in your relationship with the Lord? Because again, you are giving so much of yourself to others. And then part 2, who is helping you get there? Miss Therapist.
Yes. One, I've had to really learn work boundaries because now that I own my own practice, I'm a one-man show. And so the best thing I ever did for myself was delete my email off of my phone, my work email. Yes. So somebody needs to hear that. Somebody go delete your work email off the phone.
Wow.
If it is an emergency, they will call you. If it's, your work or whatever, you just can't be available 24/7 for everyone. And people will always adjust to your boundaries, especially when it comes to work boundaries. So that might be for someone. I've had to really learn that. So I don't check my email over the weekend. Clients can always email me, but that's one way that I'm trying to preserve myself. But more so, I'm in this really sweet season with we have what's called home group at my church. It's our community group, our small group, and I've been with them for 4 years now, which feels so wild. So we're in this really sweet time period where they see me through a whole lot, I've seen them through a whole lot, and we just started doing this thing where it's kind of like confessional, but we confess to one another. And I think that's one of the things in the church where we talk about, right, from the pulpit of like confess your sins to one another, but like we don't actually do it. But it is truly what's saving my life right now in terms, it doesn't feel great always, like having that accountability, but to have people who know what's going on truly of the sins that are going on in my life, the unhelpful thoughts I'm having, whatever, and to have people checking in on me about it throughout the week of like, hey, I'm praying for you, or like, hey, I saw this verse. And I wanted to send it to you because I know it's relating to your issue of like inviting them into those dark places. Like I'm such a big believer that every darkness can be undone by the light. And so that means I also have to invite the light in, right? Even when it doesn't feel good. So I think that's how I'm growing right now in my relationship with the Lord and with others.
I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thank you. And let me tell you, it's been life-saving work, truly.
It's like I know it's not therapy, but for the therapist, that's very healthy and helpful for you.
Yes. And hey, listen, I'm a therapist and I still go to my own therapy.
Good for
I
you.
still think it's so important. And yeah, I sometimes think that therapists make the best clients and the worst clients, but that's another podcast for another time.
Okay, so who's helping you get there?
Yes. So I am doing, y'all may have heard of it, the Bible recap,
Yes.
the daily reading plan and the podcast. That has been a really helpful tool for me because I'm one of those people, I can't just open up my Bible and then just hope that I land on something and learn something. I really need structure. And so that's been really good structure. And some of my friends are doing it too. So we get to hold each other accountable in that. So that is one thing that's helping me.
Are you reading anything right now, or do you have any book recommendations for those of us that are interested in learning more?
Yes. I just finished the book Breaking Free from Body Shame by Jess Connolly. Oh, it's good. It's good. I actually just wrote a curriculum to be able to bring it into churches and
Oh, wow.
at Stanford University that comes along my clinical knowledge that comes alongside the book. So if you want that, hit me up. I can help you out with that. But that book is really centered in some gospel truth. So that would be a good place to start for sure.
Oh, golly, that's so good. Mallory Lamm, you are a rock star. I could not be more proud of you. We both are. And we just pray the Lord's favor and his success over you because you are providing a ministry and so much help and healing for people. So thank you, sister. What a great conversation
Ah,
today, Angela.
I loved every second of it.
Flew by, flew by. Everybody just hit rewind, slow it down to the slowest speed.
Take
And
notes.
yeah, listen again. All right, sister, we love you so much. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, y'all. Love you guys.